Story 1. It started the week I moved into my first apartment alone. I had just turned 25, excited to finally leave behind roommates, dishes that weren't mine, and the noise of shared spaces. The building was old, early 1900s maybe, but it had charm, high ceilings, a creaky wooden staircase, and thick brick walls. My unit was on the second floor, just above the lobby, with windows that faced the street and a narrow alley that ran between buildings. I didn't notice anything weird that first night. Just unpacked, microwaved some leftover pizza, watched television, and fell asleep half dressed on the couch. That changed the second night. Around 2:30 a.m., I was woken up by a knock. Not a loud bang or pounding, just this faint, steady knocking. Not at my door, at my window. My bedroom window was cracked open slightly for air. It faced the alley, which I thought was inaccessible unless someone had a ladder or climbed something. I froze, hard hammering. The knocking stopped after maybe 20 seconds. I didn't look. I couldn't, but I locked the window and shoved a chair under the doorknob like I was in some horror movie. The next morning, I chalked it up to a dream. Maybe even an animal. Raccoons existed in the city. Maybe it was wind or branches, though there were no trees. I tried to shake it off. That evening I met one of the neighbors, an older woman named Donna who lived across the hall. She was friendly, talkative, the kind who always lingered in the hallway after mail runs. I mentioned the knocking, hoping she'd say something normal to ease my nerves. She didn't. Her face shifted a little, subtle but enough. She said, "It's probably just the guy upstairs. He doesn't always know what he's doing." I frowned. "There's someone upstairs?" She nodded. "Yeah, weird setup in this building. That upstairs unit's not on the main lease list. Guy's been there a while. Keeps to himself." She said it like it was fine, normal. Like there wasn't something completely unnerving about a man in the apartment above me who apparently didn't always know what he was doing. That night, I lay awake again. I couldn't help but picture the man upstairs. What did she mean? He didn't always know what he was doing. Was he mentally unstable? Was he harmless? Or did he wander in the night, confused, perhaps trying to open other people's windows? I didn't hear anything that night. No knocks, no footsteps, just silence. And silence sometimes is worse than noise. I didn't sleep well. Days passed. I avoided the alley window, kept it locked. But one morning, when I went to the kitchen to make coffee, I noticed something through the front-facing window that stopped me cold. Across the street, in the building directly opposite mine, was a window with a clear view of my apartment. And in that window stood a man. He wasn't doing anything, just standing, staring, directly at me, at my window. He didn't move. I watched him for a few seconds, then backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. I waited, peeking from the hallway, until I built the courage to look again. The man was gone. I tried to convince myself again. Coincidence? Bad timing? Maybe a neighbor stretching. Maybe I'd misread it. But something about how still he had been, it didn't sit right. That weekend, I left town to visit my parents. I needed space, a mental reset. But when I got back Sunday night, I knew something had changed. My door was locked, yes. No signs of break-in, but the air felt wrong. The kitchen light, which I always turned off, was on, and there were faint smudges, fingerprints, maybe, on the inside of the alley window. That window I hadn't opened since the night of the knocking. I checked the closet, bathroom, behind the shower curtain, under the bed. I found nothing, but I couldn't sleep. I sat in bed, wrapped in a hoodie with a flashlight beside me, ears straining for any sound. And that's when I heard it. Not knocking this time. Not even from my apartment. It was footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps pacing above me. The upstairs unit. The one with the man who didn't always know what he was doing. I couldn't bring myself to sleep. The footsteps above kept going, back and forth like someone trying to wear a groove into the floor. It wasn't constant, but it came in waves. Quiet for 10 minutes, then a few steps. Silence again. Then more, a dragging sound. I stared at the ceiling like I could see through it. I wanted to believe it was just an old building settling, maybe even someone moving furniture. But this felt different, purposeful. I called Donna the next morning. I didn't want to bother her, but I needed to know more about the guy upstairs. She hesitated. His name's Larry, I think. No family, no job. Been here for a long time. The landlord lets him stay rent-free. I think it's some sort of deal. Nobody really talks to him. He doesn't talk much. Has he ever come into anyone's apartment, I asked? There was a pause. Not that I've heard of, but people have moved out quickly after the unit below him became vacant. That was me. I had just taken that exact unit. She lowered her voice. I don't want to freak you out, but keep your windows locked, okay? That day, I called the landlord, asked about Larry, asked if someone had entered my unit while I was gone. He brushed it off, told me I was probably imagining things, that Larry was harmless. I didn't feel reassured. That night, I set up my phone on the kitchen table, camera facing the alley window. I just wanted proof I wasn't losing my mind. I hit record and left the light off. Then I went to bed, trying to ignore every creak and gust of wind. Morning came. I didn't want to check the video at first. I hesitated, holding the phone, thumb hovering over play. When I finally watched it, my stomach dropped. The screen showed a dark, grainy view of the kitchen for hours. Nothing at first. Just stillness. But around 3:17 a.m., there was movement. The alley window. Something moved just beyond the glass. A face. Pale. Pressed to the pane. Just staring inside. No knock this time. Just watching. Watching for several minutes. Then it backed away into the shadows. I froze the frame, staring at the face. It was blurry, but unmistakably human. And it wasn't me. I showed the footage to the landlord. He told me I was trespassing on someone's privacy, said Larry. Use the fire escape for air sometimes. That it wasn't a big deal. I asked how he got onto the fire escape without being on the lease, without being listed anywhere, without keys. He had no answer, just told me to relax. So I went to the police. They were polite but disinterested. Told me to get a security camera. Said unless someone actually entered my apartment, there wasn't much they could do. I bought a camera, set it up in the living room, angled toward the hallway and kitchen. That night, I barely slept. The camera blinked red from the bookshelf, a silent witness. And at 2:46 a.m., the alert woke me. Motion detected. I opened the app with shaking hands. And there he was, in my hallway, inside, just standing, not looking at the camera, looking toward my bedroom door. I screamed, grabbed my phone and locked myself in the bathroom, called 911. The police arrived 10 minutes later. The front door was still locked. No signs of forced entry, but the window in the kitchen, barely wide enough, was unlatched. They found no one. Larry wasn't upstairs. The landlord claimed he must have gone out for air, but when I demanded police check the upstairs unit, they forced the landlord to open it, and what we saw made my blood run cold. The apartment was nearly empty. One mattress on the floor. No sheets. One chair by a window facing directly into mine. A pile of old newspapers. And taped to the walls. Photos. Dozens of them. Photos of me. Sleeping. Eating. Walking through my kitchen. Some were taken from outside, through the alley window. Others, from inside my apartment. I don't remember what I did next. I just remember collapsing. The police finally took it seriously. Larry was missing, never found. The landlord denied knowing about the photos. The building got investigated, but nothing stuck. I moved out the next day. I don't sleep near windows anymore. I still use blackout curtains. And every time I feel like someone's watching, I wonder if he ever left, or if he's just watching someone else now, through a different window. Story 2. It started when my boyfriend and I moved into our first home together. We were both in our late 20s, had steady jobs, and were excited to finally live somewhere that felt truly ours. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older folks and a few young families, but our next-door neighbor stood out immediately. His name was Mr. Harding. He lived alone in a house with drawn curtains, an overgrown yard, and a detached garage that always seemed padlocked, even though I never saw a car. Mr. Harding was in his 60s, thin, always wearing the same gray flannel and faded jeans, and he barely spoke. When we first moved in, I waved. He just looked at me, expressionless, and turned away. I chalked it up to him being a grump, but then weird things started happening. I'd hear sounds from his garage late at night, metal clanking, sometimes what sounded like muffled thuds. I told my boyfriend, but he said I was probably just hearing things. But then, one night, I saw light coming from under the garage door. It was well past midnight. I watched from our bedroom window for almost an hour, and no one came out. The next morning, I tried to act casual and struck up a conversation with the mailman. I asked if he knew anything about Mr. Harding. The mailman's smile faded fast. He leaned in and said quietly, "That man's been through a lot. Best not to bother him." Then he walked off like he'd said too much. That only made me more curious. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention. I'd peek out the window every night, and almost every night that garage light flicked on, and the clanking started. Sometimes it stopped as suddenly as it began. Once, I thought I saw movement through the cracks in the garage slats, something pale and jerky. I told my boyfriend again. He said if I was that spooked, we could call the non-emergency line, but I felt ridiculous. What would I even say? My neighbor makes noises at night? Then, one evening, while watering the backyard plants, I heard a voice. It was faint, but I swear. It said, "Please." I froze, turned toward the garage next door, and heard nothing else. I waited, heart thumping, but the voice didn't come again. I walked up to the fence. There were thick bushes between us, but I pushed through a little and looked toward the garage. The door was open, just a crack. Not enough to see inside, but enough to feel like someone, or something, was watching. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the voice in my head, that quiet, pleading, "Please," like someone barely had the strength to say it. I told my boyfriend again the next morning, more urgently this time, and he finally took it seriously. We agreed not to confront Mr. Harding directly, but to keep watch. That evening, we both sat in our dimmed living room with the lights off, staring through the blinds toward the garage. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the light flicked on, same pale glow. Then the sounds. Metal scraping, soft bumps, something like a chair being dragged. We waited. A few minutes later, we saw a shadow pass in front of the frosted garage window. My boyfriend grabbed his phone and started recording, but just as he lifted it, the light went out. Silence. Like whoever, or whatever, was inside, knew we were watching. The next day, we sent the footage to the local sheriff's office along with a noise complaint. It wasn't much, but they said they'd send someone to check it out. We waited anxiously. A cruiser showed up that afternoon. We watched from our window as the officer knocked on Mr. Harding's door. He opened it after a minute. They spoke for maybe 3 minutes. Then the officer left. That was it. I called and asked what happened. They told me Mr. Harding had explained the noises as car restoration projects, and that the officer had found nothing suspicious. But Mr. Harding didn't own a car, at least not one we'd ever seen. That night, the light came on again. This time it was brighter, more intense, like someone had added new bulbs. The sounds were worse, more violent. Banging, louder thuds. I had chills. Then, through the cracks in the wood, I saw a hand. Just a hand, pale, trembling, pressed against the inside of the garage door window. I screamed. My boyfriend rushed over and saw it too. He called 911 immediately. The dispatcher took it seriously this time. Within minutes, 2 cruisers arrived. We watched, breathless, as officers knocked. Mr. Harding didn't answer. They circled around to the garage. One drew his weapon. They forced the garage door open. What we saw next still haunts me. There, inside that dimly lit space, was a young woman chained to a support beam, covered in bruises, barely conscious. She had duct tape over her mouth and wounds on her wrists. The officers cut her loose and called for backup. Paramedics came and rushed her away. Mr. Harding was arrested within the hour. The whole street was in shock. Apparently, she'd been missing for months. She'd answered a fake job ad and was abducted. Harding had kept her hidden for weeks in that garage, drugged and bound. After the police left, one of the officers told us quietly that if we hadn't called that night, she might not have made it through another day. Mr. Harding had no prior record. Just a quiet old man with a garage full of horror. Every time I close my blinds now, I double-check the locks. I don't trust silence anymore. Behind it, something horrifying might be waiting. Something just one wall, one fence, one garage door away. Story 3. It started with a knock on the wall. Just a soft, steady tapping late one Thursday night. I lived in apartment 2A, a small corner unit with thin walls and a view of the alley. The complex was cheap and the neighbors mostly kept to themselves. But whoever had moved into 2B wasn't like the others. He hadn't introduced himself. He never came out during the day. I only knew someone was in there because of the occasional lights and the noises. Odd noises. Like dragging furniture in the middle of the night. Like humming. That Thursday I was watching television when I heard the tapping. Not on my door. On the wall. Behind my couch. It was deliberate. 3 taps. Then silence. I muted the television. Waited. Another 3 taps. I stood, heart already speeding up, and walked to the wall. "Hello?" I said, unsure what I was even doing. The tapping stopped. I didn't sleep well. The next morning I went to the manager's office and asked about the neighbor in 2B. He flipped through a clipboard and said, "Oh, yeah. He moved in last month. Quiet guy, pays cash." I asked his name. The manager squinted. Something Polish? Maybe? I'd have to check the lease. That wasn't helpful. That night, I stayed up late again watching. I kept the lights off and waited by the peephole. Around 2:15 a.m., I heard the sound again. This time it wasn't tapping. It was a scraping sound. Something is being dragged. I pressed my eye to the peephole, barely breathing. The hallway was dark, but just then, I saw him. A tall man, gaunt, with messy black hair, was moving slowly toward his door. But what made my skin crawl was that he wasn't walking. He was shuffling, like one foot dragging behind. He reached into his coat and pulled out a long silver key. He stared directly at my door and smiled, then unlocked his unit and vanished inside. I backed away from the door, my hands trembling. The next morning I heard a knock, on my actual door this time. I peeked through the peephole. No one was there, but on the floor sat a Polaroid photo. I opened the door slowly and picked it up. It was a photo of me, asleep on my couch. My mouth went dry. I hadn't had visitors. I hadn't posted anything online. My windows were shut. That meant someone had been inside. I reported it to the office, but they brushed it off. Maybe someone's playing a prank, they said. I told them I was serious, that someone had been in my apartment. They promised to send maintenance to check the locks. They didn't. That night, I pushed a heavy chair in front of the door. I barely slept. I kept the lights on, and at exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard it again. The tapping. This time, on my bedroom wall. 3 taps, then 2, then 3 again. I sat frozen in bed, staring at the wall. I couldn't tell if it was a message. I couldn't tell if it was even real anymore. But I knew he was watching me. Somehow, from inside his apartment, or maybe from inside mine. I didn't go to work the next day. I couldn't. I stayed in bed with a kitchen knife under my pillow, waiting for any sound. Around noon, I finally built up the courage to go knock on 2B's door. I wanted answers, or at least a face, but when I knocked, nothing. I waited, knocked again, still nothing. That door hadn't been opened in hours, maybe days. I even pressed my ear to it. Silence. When I walked away, I noticed something strange. The peephole in his door. It was covered from the inside, taped over. That's when I started researching. I looked up every news report I could find on the building. I found nothing. But then I searched the address with missing persons, and I found something. A Reddit thread, old and barely upvoted, from 3 years ago. Some user said their sister went missing after moving into an apartment in my building, Unit 2B. I felt my stomach turn. I clicked the username, but the account was deleted. The next evening, I went back to the manager's office. I demanded to see the lease or tenant info. He refused, said it was private, but he looked nervous, sweaty. I asked him if he'd actually seen the guy who lives in 2B. He said, "Sure, I guess. Once, I think." I knew he was lying. That night, the noises came back louder. It wasn't tapping now. It was knocking. Fast. Frenzied. As if someone were pounding their fists against the wall. Then I heard footsteps on the ceiling, but I lived on the top floor. That's when I called the cops. I told them someone had been inside my unit, and I feared for my life. 2 officers showed up just after midnight. I told them everything. Showed them the photo. One of them raised an eyebrow. The other said they talked to the guy in 2B. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again, and again. Nothing. Then they tried the knob. It was unlocked. I watched from behind them as they opened the door slowly, guns drawn. What we saw made one of them step back instantly. The place was empty. Not just no furniture. No signs of life. No dishes, no bed. Just walls covered in taped Polaroids. All of me. Sleeping, showering, cooking. Every moment of privacy I thought I had violated. One of the officers said, "Jesus, these must have been taken from inside your place." They asked me to leave while they cleared the scene. I sat in the stairwell, shaking, until one came back down. He told me there was something else, something I needed to see. He led me back in, down a small hall where a closet sat ajar. Inside it was a hole, cut out clean through the drywall. A tunnel had been carved between 2B and my bedroom, hidden behind a shelf, big enough for someone to crawl through. They found stained blankets inside, food wrappers, a knife, and a single, empty camera case. But the tenant, whoever he was gone. They never found him. I moved out the next day, left my stuff behind. I couldn't sleep anymore, not after knowing he'd watched me for weeks. Months, maybe, from inches away. That apartment should have felt safe. My door was locked, my windows closed, but all he needed was a wall.